When American tourists travel, they don't just pack bags, they bring their entire cultural operating system, and they expect the world to run its software. This isn't about simple rudeness or cultural insensitivity. It represents a far deeper, more fundamental crash of two completely different logics governing how human beings interact with systems, rules, and shared space. I've spent years observing these fascinating collisions, where an American's deep-seated faith in personal negotiation and customizable reality meets Europe's profound respect for immutable, historical code. The resulting friction creates moments of profound misunderstanding, quiet comedy, and genuine cultural revelation. That it begins with a core, almost unconscious American belief that rules represent the opening position in a conversation, not the final word. In the United States, systems are architecturally designed to accommodate the individual. From have-it-your-way fast food to endlessly customizable tech interfaces, the message is clear: your preference matters. Voice that preference with enough confidence and conviction, and you can effectively rewrite local policy. This is the cultural water Americans swim in, a world where assertiveness is often rewarded with accommodation. Now, transport that mindset across the Atlantic. Picture approaching the magnificent facade of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome on a sweltering summer day, dressed in a tank top and shorts. A guard will inevitably stop you, gesturing not with anger, but with weary professionalism, toward the clearly posted dress code requiring covered shoulders and knees. The American tourists, operating from their internal logic, might laugh warmly. Come on, they could say, God loves all his children, regardless of their fabric choices. The guard, a veteran of this exact exchange, replies with an even unflappable tone, perhaps, but my job is to love the rules. For the tourist, this is a heartfelt debate about spirituality, personal freedom, and modern interpretation. For the guard, it is simple, non-negotiable protocol. The system, in this case a 2,000-year-old institution, is not listening for your theological or sartorial rebuttal. It simply exists, and expects compliance. That is this mere stubbornness on the guard's part, or a tourist's entitlement, or is it something far more significant, etched deep into the cultural wiring of each society? The answer lies not in the individuals, but in the invisible frameworks they inhabit. This foundational clash extends powerfully into the realm of public trust and shared infrastructure. Consider the Berlin U. An American visitor, accustomed to systems where payment is tightly coupled with immediate service verification, boards without a ticket. His internal logic runs: if no inspector physically checks me, then the ride is effectively free. The transaction hasn't been completed from his perspective. When he is finally stopped by an inspector several stops later, his reaction is often indignation. Your system failed to check me, he might argue. The inspector, however, does not perceive a failure of the system. He sees a failure of a personal and flawed calculation. In his mind, the social contract was active the moment the tourist entered the public network. You checked yourself, you might calmly state, the moment you decided the community's rules were a personal option. Here lies the crux. The American sees a discrete, personalism transaction. I pay for a service the moment it is verified and rendered to me. The European perspective is rooted in a broader social contract. You contribute to the infrastructure you choose to use, upholding a collective agreement that ensures it exists for everyone. This divergence creates what we might call the personalization feedback loop. Americans are culturally programmed, from schoolyards to boardrooms, to believe that assertive personal logic can and should reshape reality. If you can articulate your position clearly, persuasively, and confidently enough, the rule itself ought to bend. Your narrative has power. This is the engine behind customer service victories, great appeals, and negotiated deals back home. Witness this loop in a classic Parisian boulangerie. A tourist approaches the counter and, with a smile, requests a gluten-free croissant. From her perspective, this is a straightforward dietary accommodation, no different from asking for soy milk in a coffee. But to the baker, a custodian of form, this request isn't heard as a need. It is heard as a request to reinvent the very essence of a centuries-old creation. The flour, the butter, the lamination process, they aren't just ingredients. They are the definition. His polite, firm, impossible, Madame is therefore not a denial of service or a lack of hospitality. It is a defense of culinary canon. The disappointed customer, perhaps filming the exchange for social media later, captions the video. France refuses to evolve. In her mind, she sought a simple customization. What she encountered was an unbending definition. She wanted an edit. She was handed a constitution. Why does this specific interaction generate such profound friction? because each party is diagnosing a completely different problem. One side sees a bug in the system, an inflexible, outdated rule that fails a basic customer-centric test. The other side sees a clear user error, fundamental misunderstanding of the system's purpose and parameters. They are not even arguing about the same thing. The consequences of this logic clash aren't confined to museums and bakeries. They extend into realms of personal safety and civic responsibility. On a sun-drenched Greek island, a tourist rents a moped. The rental agent hands him a helmet, citing the local law. The tourist scoffs, waving it away. It's a free country, he declares with a grin, invoking a principle he feels is universal. The rental agent, under his breath, mutters the corrective, "Not yours." Minutes later, after a minor spill on a gravel curve, the tourist is dusty, scraped, and furious. He returns to the rental stand. "You should have warned me that was dangerous," he exclaims. At that moment, the same agent drives by on another moped, slows, and hands him the very helmet he refused. "Warning delivered," the agent says flatly, before driving off. The lesson embedded in this moment wasn't primarily about cranial safety. It was a live demonstration of the relationship between individual choice and inescapable consequence. His personal freedom to choose no helmet did not and could not negate the local law, the physics of asphalt, or the reality of the traffic code. His personal logic met an impersonal world, and the world didn't budge. The expectation of reciprocity and universal recognition faces similar tests. At the grand entrance to the Louvre, a visitor from Washington, D.C., proudly flashes his Smithsonian membership card, expecting to bypass the lengthy queue. "We're all part of the same cultural mission." He beams at the guard. The guard, unmoved, gestures to the snaking line. "Your mission is there. Ours is here." The tourist walks away, sighing to his companion about poor institutional partnerships and a lack of global vision. He saw Universal Museum access a network of cultural institutions honoring each other's patrons. The Louvre administration saw a specific queue for a specific museum with its own specific funding and rules. He wasn't wrong in spirit or intention, but he was profoundly, operationally wrong in context. His personal logic of reciprocity collided with a localized system of administration. This tension crystallizes into a kind of cultural proverb in America. Confidence often creates truth. A firmly held and voiced position can shape outcomes. In Europe, truth exists independent of your volume. The facts of history, law, and tradition stand apart, waiting not for your agreement, but simply for your acknowledgement. Perhaps the most common, daily battleground for this conflict is the simple restaurant bill. In a bustling Madrid tapas bar, a diner receives her bill and points to the €2.50 charge for bottled water. "Water is a human right," she declares, invoking a moral principle. The waiter nods, unfazed. "I agree completely. And the glass bottle, the energy to chill it, and my walk from the bar to your table are €2.50. She demands tap water. He explains, patiently, that they do not serve tap water. A standoff ensues, but it's not really about money. It's a profound disagreement over what, exactly, is being purchased. Is it the elemental H2O which indeed falls from the sky? Or is it the served, guaranteed, contextually appropriate water of that specific establishment, delivered as part of a hospitality experience? One view is abstract and universal. The other is concrete and local. This deeply held belief that the customer's compelling narrative can and should override local operational code manifests in virtually every arena. Aboard a Swiss quiet carriage train, a traveler takes a loud, protracted business call. He is met not with a shout, but with a sea of silent, glaring disapproval. Annoyed, he protests, "I paid for this seat." A local passenger might lean over and whisper, "And we paid for the silence you are now breaking." What one person experiences as the exercise of personal freedom to conduct his business, others experience as an invasion of a collectively purchased peace. To many Americans, this collective enforcement feels oppressive, a restriction on individual liberty. To the Swiss, it is the foundational civic agreement that makes liberty possible for everyone in that shared space. It is freedom from, not just freedom to. The clash escalates further when personal ambition meets protected history. In the ancient city of Dubrovnik, a tourist launches a drone into the sky above the iconic terracotta roofs, despite prominent signs prohibiting it. When a guard swiftly arrives to confiscate the device, the tourist is ready with his defense. "I'm documenting history," he asserts. The guard, in his view, isn't enforcing a sensible preservation rule. He is hindering creative rights and artistic expression. The tourist appeals to lofty, abstract, international principles of art and access. The guard points, wordlessly, to the very concrete, local sign written in Croatian and English. Each party is operating from a completely different manual. One manual is personal, aspirational, and forward-looking. The other is communal, historical, and protective. They are having two separate arguments on the same patch of ground. This dynamic leads us to another, immutable truth. You cannot negotiate with a mountain. You cannot debate a monument. You cannot appeal a millennium of tradition. Their existence is their argument. So what, in essence, is really happening in these countless daily encounters? It is rarely simple arrogance. It is more accurately a form of applied, practical philosophy hitting a wall. The American instinct, honed by a society built on innovation and disruption, is to troubleshoot, to optimize, to personalize any system for a better, more efficient, more tailored user experience. If a process seems slow or inefficient, the instinct is to diagnose it as broken and propose a fix. If a rule feels arbitrary or inconvenient, the assumption is that it must be negotiable, a starting point for a discussion that will lead to a mutually agreeable exception. But then you reach a European border checkpoint. The officer takes your passport, and the stamp comes down with a definitive, physical thud. That sound is the period at the end of the sentence. Arguing that the stamp was applied too aggressively or that you'd prefer a different page misses the entire point. The stamp isn't a commentary or a gesture. It is a concrete fact. There is no customer service department for a nation-state, no manager to whom you can escalate your complaint about sovereign procedure. Your internal logic, the logic of negotiation and customer satisfaction, meets a system that is definitionally indifferent to it. Therefore, the true humility of travel, for the American, transcends just seeing new sights. It becomes about repeatedly encountering entire systems that are utterly indifferent to your internal reasoning. The world, in these moments, is not rejecting you personally. It is politely, firmly rejecting the entire premise that all systems are inherently malleable through persuasive dialogue or the assertion of individual preference. This can be a jarring, even ego-bruising realization. Yet, there is a strange beauty and the source of the frustration in that very indifference. You cannot request a refund for the Alps because you found them cloudy. You cannot ask to speak to the manager of Notre Dame to dispute its dress code. You cannot leave a one-star online review for the entire concept of the Italian riposo, the midday closure of shops. These things exist with a monumental permanence that does not care about your review, your schedule, or your personal logic. They simply are. This does not mean you should not travel. On the contrary, it means the most valuable souvenir you can possibly bring home is not a magnet or a shirt, but a subtly rewired perspective. The journey offers a chance to step outside your own cultural code and run a different program, if only for a while. The shift begins with a simple reframing. See rules not as arbitrary restrictions designed to annoy you, but as the source code of obeys the instructions that make that society function. That queue, that dress code, that silent train carriage is part of the operating system. Understand that fairness in another culture may not mean individualized accommodation or exception. It may mean the fairness of utterly uniform, impersonal application, the fairness where no one gets to cut the line, where the rule is the same for the duchess and the student, because that predictability is itself a form of justice. Most importantly, recognize that your personal logic, however rational and compelling it feels to you, is just one algorithm. It is a piece of software that runs brilliantly in its home environment. But you have now traveled to a place running on different, older, and often more complex code. The error message you're receiving isn't a sign of your failure or the system's stupidity. It's a sign of incompatibility. If this exploration of the invisible code clash between the American travel mindset and the long-standing systems of the wider world resonates with you, if it explains past frustrations or prepares you for future journeys, then you understand the core mission of Winds of Thought. We are dedicated to mapping these hidden cultural operating systems. 2. Translating the error messages of cross-cultural interaction. And 2. Providing the user manual for the world's diverse social software. If you find value in this deep dive into the unspoken frameworks that govern our global interactions, please support the channel by liking this video. That simple act is the strongest signal that helps us continue this work of cultural translation and insight. Subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, because next week we are deconstructing the silent, intricate, and deeply nuanced language of Japanese social harmony, a system where indirect communication is an art form and where reading the air is more important than hearing the words. Thank you for watching. And remember, you can't troubleshoot culture. You cannot debug a tradition or install a patch on history. You can only observe, adapt, and experience it. The goal is not to win an argument with a system, but to understand it well enough to move through it with grace. And perhaps, to bring a better, broader understanding back home.